In 2022, a month before the official start of the run, Marvel announced that Zeb Wells' second story arc in Amazing Spider-Man would be the long-anticipated Amazing Spider-Man 900. Not only did we get a synopsis for the story itself, but we also found out the current main artist John Romita Jr. would be stepping back for the oversized issue, and a popular comics artist Ed McGuinness would make his debut on the title. This was nothing new for ASM fans, as we've had rotating art teams for many runs in the past, but little did we know that Ed's addition to the art team would be much more than a guest spot in a Centennial. Not only did Ed become the secondary artist of the run, but he would spark some controversy during his, to date, 3 story arcs. We are going to go through them one by one, so let's just jump in with Amazing Spider-Man number 900, aka New Sinestro, is a story that took many by surprise. After the more grounded, serious tone of the first arc, many, including myself, found it surprising of how much of a tonal shift there was between the two stories. While Tombstone was gritty, had heavy themes of depression, loss, and philosophy, New Sinestro went for a much more lighter tone. Not to say that New Sinestro is all fluff, while it does have a sweet sugary outside, there are some hidden depth in between the quips and gags. The story of New Sinestro is of who is Spider-Man at its core, a story of what makes him him, just done in a way that many found kind of unsatisfying in execution. The story just felt off, timed wrong as a counter to the first arc and as a centennial. The last centennials were some of the biggest moments in Spider-Man's history: his death in 700, the return of Norman Osborn as a major threat to Spider-Man and Peter Parker in 800. These stories felt big, and with a mystery hanging over our head and a lot of plot beats set up in the first arc, I think a lot of people, including myself, thought this would tie in, but it didn't. New Sinestro is a palate cleanser, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Many fans balk at the idea of a fun, lighthearted story, but many felt the same way about the dark edginess that the 90s brought to the character. It's good to have balance. A run with no stakes won't keep readers invested, but a run too full of them can lead readers to feeling like the book is too much of an emotional toll or a chore to read. Quote, when we got Ed Mcguiness, that started just covering what kind of story he wanted to tell. I think at the end of the day, it veiled more evergreen, but I think it was trying to tell the most bombastic story with as many colorful characters as possible, because that's what I wanted to see. Zeb Wells, Comic Shenanigan Podcast. Zeb Wells has talked many times about writing for your artist, not a novel concept for a comic book, which is a team effort. From writers to pencilers to inkers to colorers, letterers, etc. But I think once you look at this story through this lens, the differences between the first arc, brought to life by the gritty, rough-edged Daredevil artist John Romita Jr., and the softer, more cartoony style of Ed Mcguinness, the difference could not be more clear. Now, I've been focusing on the negatives of this story, and while personally I'm not the biggest fan of this story, I have talked to many who have, and I see the value in the creative team's choices here. Quote, I just thought that a 70-page Ed Mcguinness Spider-Man story dropped into your lap on some Wednesday would just be really freaking fun to have happen. Zeb Wells, Comic Shenanigans Podcast. Zeb and Co. were going for something a bit lighter. A fun, giant book that would entertain and just make your day. This is a book that is supposed to make you smile, and I appreciate that attempt. Comics get lost sometimes in the weeds of stories. From the Hickmans, Ewings, Bendises, these creators have made brilliant, enriching stories, but sometimes can lose the fun of a classic Silver Age romp. That's what this story is. A big 80-page, gorgeous romp that can be fun for new and old fans alike. As the 900th issue, and a celebration of 60 years of Spider-Man, Zeb and Ed wanted to tell a story that harkened back to the bygone era, and make a love letter to Stan and Steve's Amazing Spider-Man Annual #1. But this was far from Zeb and Ed's last collaboration, and things were going to get a lot more darker. And no, I don't mean the tone and stories. On May 7th, 2022, we got our first tease of Marvel's next Spider-led event, Dark Web. This event was a spiritual sequel to X-Men's 1998 event, Inferno, an event where demons of Limbo invaded New York City, and many heroes including Spider-Man had to fight them off as they invaded the city, turning objects into deadly villains to the people of NYC. Zeb Wells is not only a well-known Spider-Man writer, but also worked with the X-Men office on books like New Mutants, where he played a little with Limbo, and then more recently a book called Hellions, a wonderful story about misfit mutants during the dawn of X-time of X-Men's history. In Hellions, Wells toyed around with the puppy love of Alex Summers and clone of Jean Grey, Madeline Pryor, leaving the newly revived Madeline in a new position as the ruler of Limbo. Meanwhile, before Zeb took a role as the solo ASM writer, he worked with a team of writers to return Peter Parker's clone, Ben Reilly, as the main Spider-Man. Nevertheless, as you can imagine, that didn't go very well for Benji, and he was left with a nasty case of memory distortion and goo. The two decided to team up and let Limbo loose on New York once again, run. And while maybe the entire Dark Web event deserves a video of its own, we are going to be focusing on the 4 parts of Amazing Spider-Man. ASM's 15 through 18 is Zeb Wells and Ed Mcguinness' Battle of Brothers, Peter Parker versus Ben Reilly, and another confrontation a decade in the making. An event like this relishes in the 90s nostalgia, the era of the original Inferno, and that oozes out in Amazing Spider-Man 15, as we have a rematch between Spider-Man and his old foe, new ally, Venom. Venom, now changed by Chasm and Madeline Pryor to resemble his original 90s self, is on the hunt for Spider-Man. The two give fight in a more pop than substance fight, drawn gorgeously by Ed, left readers stumbling on what the story is trying to tell. With lackluster jokes and very little plot progression, Amazing Spider-Man 15 felt like a flop immediately, raising the concerns that this creative pairing wasn't fitting well at all. What did help save this issue, though, was the inclusion of the supporting cast: J. Jonah Jameson, Kamala Khan, and the back of Norman's head, as his defeat from Chasm is in the prelude issue. Wells has been consistently good at showing off Spider-Man's supporting characters in this run, and Dark Web is no different. While characters like Kamala are used to muddling effects, the inclusion of Jonah and later Robbie Robertson are welcomed in the chaotic nature of this book. And as we enter Amazing Spider-Man number 16, the light shines in the darkness. Quote, "It was really sad for me to think about him being warred by Beyond, by telling, hey, you're a guy, you're so strong, you're the better Spider-Man, and we want you. And then for him to find out they really wanted him because he was easy to manipulate." Zeb Wells' ex-wife podcast. Amazing Spider-Man number 16 is probably the saving grace of Dark Web in my opinion. Well, besides him, but we'll get to him later. Amazing Spider-Man number 16 bounced back from one of the worst issues of the run and gave us a much more visually and emotionally interesting fight between Spidey and Chasm. While not being the peak of writing or anything, there was certainly some of the lame over-the-top humor. I found myself much more interested in this issue compared to the previous. From Chasm's cool visual style, new powers, and interesting one-liners, I started to have hope for this event again. The idea of Chasm is something not very new. Evil Peter Parker has been on Marvel's brain since Superior Spider-Man, and even evil Ben Reilly wasn't a novel concept anymore. But there was something different about Chasm, the hatred towards Peter, the sympathetic tragedy that Wells detailed from Beyond. These are all elements for an exciting villain and an exciting story, but what ASM 16 leads us into shows us that tone and context matters. Pushing into Amazing Spider-Man number 17 and 18, we see Peter, Jonah, and Robbie all stuck in limbo in a slow and confusing, slow-paced plan to gain Peter's soul. Through a magic apple established in prior issues, this leads us to some slow-paced final 2 issues, which don't really get us far, but on the other side of things, gives us some really memorable moments of this all. As detailed in New Sinister, Peter has started the run depressed and is slowly building himself back up. This is the climax to that. This story shows us how far he's come in one single moment. The moment under the tree is Peter's unbreakable will returning to him after months of losing it. Peter finally striking back. First was Tombstone, then was his new partnership with Norman, and newly found relationship with Black Cat. Peter is in a much different place when he was at the beginning of this run, and this moment of defiance and growth is still rippling through even more recent comics. It's a moment that is important, which I wish was given a little more time to actually feel important in this issue. I can easily see people disagreeing with me or not seeing this moment at first, because it's glossed over so quickly. We don't really linger on it, but I still think it's a solid moment surrounded by not very solid material. But talking about the good in Dark Web and more widely in Zeb and Ed's material, it wouldn't be right to not talk about the one character that this creative duo will be known for the rest of time. Rek-Rap. Quote, "We got on a Zoom with Ed and we were just talking over what we wanted to do. And you know, Ed's got this distinct style that is super bombastic and cool, and that I just wanted to make sure that he was excited. So he just said, is there anything we can do with this character design? I saw it and was like, well, this clearly has to be in the comic." Zeb Wells' ex-wife's podcast. Rek-Rap, a demon that Peter saves early in issue 17, gets a remaining piece of the symbiote that Venom accidentally left behind and is ongoing. And with some special magic, Rek-Rap is born. A new web-wingling hero that not only takes the internet by storm, but Ed Mcguinness' heart as well. Quote, "Rek-Rap makes Ed so happy, so please buy it so Ed can keep drawing Rek-Rap, because I don't know what he'd do without him." Zeb Wells, Marvel's Next Big Thing podcast. While issue number 18 had Rek-Rap carrying it, the issue itself sadly couldn't redeem this already lost story, as strange character beats and other minis bleed into this book, leaving Chasm to look weaker than ever before, not even progressing the plot himself anymore. Chasm is handed the ultimate power on a silver platter by the far more interesting Hallows Eve. We get maybe Zeb and Ed's worst creation, King Chasm, an over-designed bruiser that lacked any emotional consequences, and felt as hollow as his memories. But as we wind down on Dark Web, you may ask what happened. This event seems so promising. Was did great things with Ben and Maddie in the past, and the event was very promising with the 2 prelude issues. Well, I have some theories and ideas. Now, I'd like to say first that I have no inside knowledge, and I do not know anything for a fact, nor am I hating on Zeb or anyone for this. Writing is hard, motivation can be lost easily. Sometimes you think an idea is super cool, and it turns out to be a mess, or you stop enjoying it yourself. Lost motivation and burnout are all very real thing. And with a guest creative team right after this arc, I think it's very possible that Zeb's first year on the book took a lot out of him. I also think that Zeb doesn't care very much for Ben Reilly. Not saying he hates him like some crazed fans out there, but I think there was a lot more interest in Maddie than Ben. Quote, I love how she, especially as Goblin Queen, she animates this part of ourselves that I think most of us have, or at least had at various ages. Growing up where you get in a relationship, she animates this rage of someone saying, you don't matter to me anymore. And you're like, oh, do I matter to anyone? Do I exist? Zeb Wells, Ex-Wives Podcast. Zeb has talked about Maddie P a lot over the years and has some love for Limbo, using in some of his earliest comic work. I think the X-Men of it all was the most interesting part to Wells, and once left to the Spider-Man portion of the event, other ideas and stories with the web slinger were more interesting to him at the time. That's Dark Web, an event that was maybe a little too X-Men-y for its own good at times. This is from the perspective of a Spider-Man fan, mind you, but this was mostly marketed as a Spider event, and it really didn't feel like it. At least we got Rek-Rap out of it. And speaking of the cute weirdo jokes from the past, that leads us to the last arc of the video. As we were nearing the end of Wells' first year on the title, little bits of information on the second year began to pop up here and there. On March 6, 2023, Zeb spoke to the Spider-Man's Comic Compendium, link in the description, at a con, and we found out that Doc Ock was in the war. This was exciting news to most, as one of Zeb's biggest works before his time on Amazing was Spider-Man Dr. Octopus Year 1, a retelling of Doc Ock's origin that was released around the time of the second Sam Raimi movie. Fans of that story knew that Zeb can write an excellent auto, and this was just a breath of fresh air, till later in the same interview, we found out that Ed Mcguinness was tasked to draw the story. There was still hope though, as I myself got to meet Zeb Wells at C2E2 myself and ask a few questions. One of them relating to this Doc Ock arc. I asked about the twist at the end of Gold Goblin number 5, but if you don't know, the shocking death of Queen Goblin took place. And Zeb told me that the Doc Ock arc would pick up right after these events. This gave me hope, and with the shocking death of Kamala Khan soon after in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man number 26, I felt strongly that this could not be another Dark Web, and to everyone's surprise, it wasn't. When Amazing Spider-Man number 27 came out, I think most of us were surprised at the tone of the issue. A pretty somber issue, especially compared to the other Zeb and Ed issues beforehand. 27 isn't the strongest issue of the run, but it handled itself well, actually having very little of Otto and more focusing on the traumas of Peter and Norman respectively, setting up a crux while also laying the seeds in the background for a haunting story yet to come. This issue juggles a lot, from our two protagonists, a little Felicia Hardy check-in, and a J. Jonah Jameson inclusion to not only tie back in to the events of Amazing 900, but also slingshot us into the thrust of the arc. My omission of Otto in this issue isn't because of the quality, because while it is a short scene, the Otto scene gives us some great dialogue by Wells and some fun visuals as we get to see one of the big hooks of this arc, Otto's new arms. McGuinness gets to have fun with these new flashy arms, adding a nice pop of green to the silver mechanic limbs, and gives it more of an octopusy look. Not entirely an original concept, but cool nonetheless. Also, completely new abilities, the new octoids that can split apart and act like little drones. It's just a neat new way to visualize Ock's powers, and many creators have used them to fun effect. This leads us into issue 28, where we get to have fun with the things set up in the previous issue. We get to play with the old arms and Jonah's new relationship, Otto interacting with our new status quo, and just doing some fun light comic booking. Unlike in Dark Web where it felt inappropriate or jarring in how New Sinister tackled humor, this felt a lot more natural and felt like it kept the stakes while also not being overdramatic on how bad this is for our heroes. It's bad. Norman especially is in real fret after the events of this issue, but it's still a little bit more breezier than say the more gritty, darker nature of the JLJL stories. Not to discredit those stories, they are by far some of the best in the run. The word of the day is balance. Balance and tones in the run. Ed and Zeb find a balance in this arc. Balance between funny and goofy and interesting and compelling narrative. Something the two find in spades in 29 and 30. 29 being a showcase of Zeb's fluid dialogue and the oppressive growth of Ed's pencils, keeping an issue full of exposition and character moments into something fresh and visually interesting. The dynamics between the calm Norman and the erratic, heady Otto is engrossing, especially knowing the history between the two. The scene where Otto remembers his heroic days is heartbreaking, as we realize this is a story of two men now opposite of what they were during their last encounter. A redeemed Norman and an Otto who couldn't. He is lashing out at the unfair reality that is upon him, saying, hey, if I can't do it, I'm gonna make sure you can't do it either, leaving us in a stunning, if not fleeting, cliffhanger. I didn't talk much about Peter in 29 because most of it is set up for the payoffs in 30. Peter, now spine-locked with Otto's arms, is feeling the effects of this, and his little mind swap with Otto and Superior, explaining in a clever way the reasons that the alms would listen to him in New Sinister. With this knowledge, we get a cathartic and frankly very funny battle between the two, filled with some of the splashiest and exciting Ed odds thus far. It's a great look at what Otto and Peter's differences are, showing how each treat their alms, while also giving us a little taste of that superior edge that we all love. I do see people's point on how Otto feels a bit of an afterthought in this issue, slinking off with little change between this and his next appearance, but I think Otto is here more as something to push our protagonist while doing a little bit of light advertisement for the future superior book. And I don't see anything wrong with that. A lot of the early Lee and Dicko and Lee and Ramita had villains come and go, mostly as an obstacle that Peter would have to jump through while dealing with emotional troubles and such. That's what Otto is in this story. And yes, Otto isn't the kangaroo, but I think it works. Otto is a perfect character to balance the good and evil themes in this arc, as Otto bickers that this version of Norman is so boring and such, while Norman sees it as the complete opposite. The goblin is boring. Otto is boring, because evil is boring. Evil is the obstacle that good has to tend with, while dealing with the more interesting problems that come from being a good person. Is this completely true? No. They're all fascinating villains, like Otto, and I'm sure Norman turned into the goblin will be completely compelling and dramatic. But it's a nice statement to make all the same, and an interesting philosophy for a doomed man. Zeb Wells and Ed Mcguiness is probably one of the most interesting pairings in Amazing Spider-Man history. I mean, just look at the length of this video. These two probably will go down as not remembered often. A comment about Rek-Rap here and there, but I think the journey of these two titans is fascinating. From Centennials to multi-arcs, the growth is apparent. I hope to see more people appreciate the talent that Ed brings to his pencils, and the work that Zeb Wells put into finding the perfect fit. I'm actually excited for Zeb and Ed's next adventure. At the time of this recording, the Rek-Rap arc has not come out. I don't know if it will be out by the time this video has started, maybe part 1, but I hope to enjoy it. I really do. I had a lot of fun with the Doc Ock arc, and it gave me a lot of hope for this Rek-Rap arc. But if you enjoyed the video, please whip that like button and the subscribe button. It would really help a lot. Until next time, stay amazing.